Thank you for joining us today at the Australian New Zealand College of Anaesthetists. So my name is Veronica Dominiak. I'm the museum curator at the Geoffrey Kaye Museum of Anaesthetic History, and I've organised today's panel discussion. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. So this is Open House Melbourne theme is Stories of the City. And for the very first time in the college's participation in Open House Melbourne, we are celebrating ANZCA House, designed by Norman Day and Associates. I'm really excited to be welcoming Dr. Norman Day and Dr. Kirsten Day for this panel discussion with us today. So to give you some background info on their bios, and they have very extensive biographies, Dr. Norman Day is an award-winning architect, educator, and writer. He worked for the late Robin Boyd and Professor Friedrich Romberg before starting his own practice in 1971. Now works with projects located in Melbourne, Hanoi, Fiji, Bangkok, and Dili. He is a board member of Architects Without Frontiers. He was appointed adjunct professor of architecture at the University of RMIT in 1994, and RMIT also awarded him an honorary Doctor of Architecture in 2000. During the period 1976 to 2002, he was lecturer and design coordinator, Theory, History, Communications Department of Architecture, Faculty of Design and Environmental Construction, University of RMIT. And he continues to still lecture at the University of Melbourne today. Dr. Kirsten Day is a senior lecturer in architecture, technology and practice at the University of Melbourne and a principal at Norman Day and Associates. Her research examines the contingent nature of architectural practice, how the profession adapts to and is shaped by broader systems, including legislative changes, procurement methods, digital transitions, and the legacy of architectural professionalism. She is especially interested in how these systems define, restrict, or expand the architect's role. She has edited and written numerous publications and most recently co-authored a book, Organizer's Guide to Architecture Education. So you're based only a 15-minute walk from the college, and you must know the surrounding areas quite well. Do you have any special buildings around this area that you can think of that you could share with us?
Well, the one we live in is, to me, one of the most seminal buildings in Melbourne. So it's just up the road, near the tennis courts, near Commercial Road. So that's a Stanhill building. It was designed by Friedrich Romberg. And I had the great pleasure and luck to work with Romberg and Boyd, Robin Boyd. Boyd before he died, so I worked with him for 6 years. And Romberg was in Newcastle as the professor of architecture. And then when things got a bit sad at the end, Boyd was not well. I worked with Romberg for a year about a year in Newcastle. Then Boyd died. Then I came back here and took over the management of the company. But I was very lucky, fortunate to be friends with both of them. And I retained my friendship with the family since. The Stanhill building there are lots of echoes in this building about the Stanhill building, the detailing, the quality of space, perhaps the whiteness, although that's more medical, I think. But the attention to detail is what I was taught by them. And then in the conceptual terms, the overall vision being a strong vision that you could believe in and carry right through the process. So when you start a building like this, for example, it'll be 3 or 4 years before it's built. So an architect has to be very patient to hang on to the dream. And there'll be lots of reasons that people tell you can't, mostly financial. But there are some others who just argue that aesthetically they don't like what you've done. And that can be very difficult for an architect unless you're patient or extremely stubborn. The Boyd was very patient and gentle, and you wouldn't argue with Boyd. Romberg was quite different, very Germanic, and you could argue with Romberg, but good luck. So I had the balance of two of them, and I think I was able to bring that into it. But much comes from a respect for the Stanhill building, which is where we live.
I think what's been interesting too, particularly with this building and having the Victorian manor at the front, there's been a number of buildings along St Kilda Road. It's this building and around the same time where the manors haven't been treated with the same respect, where they've either been gutted out or the facade, bits of the facade remain. And it's just been interesting seeing that character of St Kilda Road, which used to be a lot of old mansions and now has now completely changed. And we had lots of discussions early on about what this building should be in contrast to that. And I mean, it was always going to be that that building was going to be the protected piece. But discussions with the CEO at the time, the board, and also with council.
Building number one out front, Ulimaroa, that is the prime exercise. If you're developing as an architect on this site, that's the thing to be protected. And so how do you do that? You do it by building a partner building, but you keep a distance. And so we thought of it more as a stage set where the main actor would be on the stage up front and we would be the back fall for it, the backdrop. It's interesting with the building, the little bit in the middle here that you can see out the window, that's not original. That was built in the 60s. So we also decided to leave that intact as a reflection of what happened then. So the basic concept was embroider what's there with what we could do here and then reflect on it. And the way we did that was by putting literally a screen up the front there, and it's propped up with metal props like a screen. So it is very much a theatrical device. And the windows that we put in that are based on the window shapes of the original building at Ulimaroa. So it's a reflection of that. We tried to reflect the lighter colour of Ulimaroa too. But we wanted to do that in sustainable materials and a sustainable approach. So one of the basic things, attitudes that I bring to my architecture, and I learned it from my bosses, was that you don't, if you can avoid it, do not use paint on a building outside because it will need to be repainted every 5 to 7 years. And that's unsustainable. So we decided to build this out of precast concrete that would not ever require any paint or external finish. And we also found that we could do that by using a concrete that was crushed up for the aggregate for the concrete walls. That was available from Adelaide. And the reason we chose that is because the Adelaide concrete colour is quite pale compared to the cement colour of Portland cement in Melbourne. So we did get a grey building. We got a sort of an off-white building. And that's there forever. It's like the front ones here, we polished like terrazzo, but it's just raw concrete. And the side ones are just unpolished. So very much to do with this sustainable attitude.
Are there any other inspirations that you drew from the Victorian heritage listed building for the design of ANZCA House?
We did. We looked carefully around Ulimaroa and how it had been put together. I mean, it's a pretty classy building, but then most of the mansions along this street were, and I knew a lot of them over the years, watched them disappear, sadly. In fact, there was a good thesis done of this in, I don't know when, by Howard Raggett, the architect who used to work with me, Ashton Raggett McDougall, where he remapped all the mansions and it looked pretty good. It would look considerably better, the street now, actually. So would Fitzroy Street. But that was important to us to understand the logic about how those things were put together, the respect for materials, and we wanted to respect heritage, but I apply heritage respect in contemporary architecture using the Borough Charter ideals. So that is, do not duplicate, do not copy, do not try and make it look like it's part of what the original was, so that for some people there might be a disassociation between what's new and what's old. And that's what that middle part there does, in my view.
There was the interior decorator, Murray Shieldrick, working with the CEO of the time, Joan Shields. And so he spent a lot of time talking about and following this project, a number of very expensive velvet curtains into a lot of our projects. But it was really interesting having someone who is so concerned, because while with architects we have a very general overview of buildings and how we then bring together all of the different groups, but working with interior decorator who had a particular love for this particular villa, but also could talk about, you know, the appropriate curtains, the types of fabrics, the colours, the cornices. Having someone who was just so detail oriented, that was just a really lovely. And I think one of the things when you work with different trades and different people is hearing their language and being able to sort of take all of that on board. But yeah, Murray was very influential in sort of some of the echoes from this building from that one.
That's true. And one of them is in these wall panels here. We don't normally go out of our way to complicated designs for wall panels up, but it does reflect what's in the older building in a contemporary way. And then because the majority of my life is spent trying to think of a good joke, I wanted to also, Kirsten and I were talking about it at the time, and we wanted to introduce some notions about the people who are building this building with us. And we had a building builder, Howard McCorkle, and his uncle Rex, who were old family friends of my family, actually. In fact, Rex had taken my sister out. Howard was still is, a mad cricket dude. He just loves his cricket. He's one of those people who dresses up and goes to India and plays games of cricket in 40 degrees heat. I mean, he's nuts. And they drink a lot of whiskey. Anyway, we reflected that in these panels. You can see at the bottom of the panels there's a cricket bat, which has been introduced. And that's dedicated in a gentle way towards the builder, because by then we had the builder on board and we were dealing with Howard, and he wouldn't stop talking about cricket. So we sort of thought, well, that's an appropriate methodology and aesthetic that we could apply to providing a traditional timber screen device, but in a contemporary sense. And you'll find some of those quotes in the architecture we do. We often put in quotations and not necessarily underlined so that you can easily understand them. You don't need to put a badge on them saying cricket bat. But for example, I talked a lot with the board members of the college at the time. It was really interesting. There were about 10 or 12 of them around a big table in the old building. And when you're with a whole lot of anaesthetists, I don't know how you go, but I'm just waiting to fall asleep. But they were so wonderful. They're beautiful people, very understanding and patient, talking about architectural ideas, which they're not that common with. But I said to them, I want to introduce some of the notions about anaesthetics and anaesthesia and what you do in pain management. And after all, if any of us go through any pretty formal medical procedures, it's the anaesthetists we're relying on for life. And so I value them very highly. And I notice so does the tax man. But I wanted to talk about that in the building design in a gentle way, a subtle way. So that's why the stair looks like it is in the middle there. That's a spine. It's intended to be a spine. It was designed by the architect to be a spine because that's where all the nervous system goes in the human body. And it was meant to reflect that sort of association. But I don't want to put a big sign on it saying spine. Just got to, if you get it, you get it. If you don't, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, unfortunately, what Norman does whenever he has some type of operation that has an anaesthetist is to ask them whether they like this building before it's operated on.
I'm really fascinated by the paneling now. I did not know about that. And for those of you who have maybe gone into Ulimaroa today, you would have seen the Tasmanian blackwood paneling that was actually salvaged from a different building of the Italianate style period from this area. So that's a really beautiful addition to the auditorium. I am very happy to have heard that story. So you already mentioned a couple of the people that were involved in the project, but this year's theme, obviously, I mentioned is Stories of the City. So not only focusing on the buildings, but obviously the people that make the buildings come to life. Can you remember any particularly interesting stories involving individuals whilst designing ANZCA House, or perhaps whilst it was being built?
Let's talk about concrete vibrators.
The foreman was one of those, I'll do it. If it's going to be done, I'll do it. Just get out of the way. He was only a little fella, but he spent most of his life surfing, and then he would work on a project like this for 10 months or whatever it took, and then he'd go surfing again. He had a very nice life, I reckon. I mean, it suited him, but he needed to do everything. It all had to be controlled by him, and that's probably a reflection on the quality of the building. He was so gifted with a good eye and a good brain. Anyway, he had a complication. One of the guys was being away in the concrete here to get the concrete into the reinforcement on the basement walls, and his vibrator got caught in the reinforcing. And usually that's a matter when people turn machinery off and get it out and fix it. But Tony's not like that. So Tony ran to the machine, grabbed hold of it, turned it back on fiercely, and suddenly we were all there. We were having a site meeting around about here somewhere, and suddenly the machine and Tony got swallowed up into the concrete wall. All we saw was a couple of little gumboots. Yeah, we thought, for a minute or two, we thought, let's leave him there. We got a hose and hosed him out, but he wasn't phased at all. He went straight back to work. But it was interesting that the building could have been morbidly more interesting. The other thing that we had in the board that we dealt with, our view was that the brief that was required for this building to fulfil its obligations in functional terms meant that it would be about this tall. And we wanted to put quite high ceiling to floor ratios in, because it is an institution, it's not an office block. And that went comfortably well with the whole board, except there were 3 or 4 of them from Sydney. And it's a good definition. It keeps helping me define the difference between Sydney and Melbourne. These guys kept asking, oh no, make it 15. That's too short, make it bigger, make it taller. And they were really anxious it could easily have been. And so what we did is we designed the structure for this building so it can be actually improved. You could add to it another 4 or 5 stories. The other thing that we did, we had to convince a lot of our consultants to go along with us in terms of the sustainable nature of what we did here. Everything had to have a good green reason, or it's not coming into this building. So, for example, the structure you can probably see in the columns is steel. It's exposed steel. And for most buildings of this order, that's quite hard to do, because the fire regulations get in the way and say, well, if we have a fire, that steel will bend and the building will collapse. But we got a special material, which is out of the military, to paint the steel, and that means it will get a 3-hour fire rating. So little things like that, and using your consultants to help you, means that we could get what we wanted, which was a linkage between structural steel, which is very lightweight, and more in the model of Robin Boyd, for example, and then precast concrete. So we're trying to always green up the building, and that's why the big foyer exists, or the agora, or whatever you call it, space in the middle, because that gathers all the light. And then the natural heating of a building is that heat rises. So all the heat that would come through from the lower ends of the building goes up. And if you look at the top of the agora here, there's a big fan or a natural ventilator that takes all the hot air out. And it's a natural air conditioning system that happens through that big hollow there. That means we don't need so much air conditioning in the building itself. So little things like that, we got enormous help.
If this building is being built today, would it still be the same type of building?
No, I don't think so, because we've all moved on. But you've got to, the other thing is that when you have a group like this, like the College of Anaesthetists, there was a very, the leader, Joan Shields, was an extremely comfortable with making decisions person, but a very good listener and a great respecter of ideas, especially architectural ideas.